Hi, welcome to another batch of classic bookmarks. A couple of years ago, we realized that we had been producing Bookmark for 30 years, some 425 episodes. To celebrate, we chose 15 shows to enhance and broadcast. The reception has been terrific. Viewers got a real kick out of seeing or re-seeing the conversations with Toni Morrison, Ray Bradbury, William Styron, Alexander McCall Smith, and many others. So, we have chosen another 15 shows from the archives. Interviews with George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, E.O. Wilson, Walter Mosley, Albert Murray, James Haskins, and 9 others. Of course, we are continuing to produce new shows with new writers and old writer friends. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoy watching these classics as much as we enjoyed making them.
Anne Rivers Siddon is not only a talented and popular writer, she's nice. We talked about her new book, Fault Lines, the state of publishing, the civil rights movement, and her days as a student in Alabama. I don't think that I had realized that you had gone to Auburn.
Yes.
But you weren't an English major.
No, in fact, I had started in architecture. I had 1 year in architecture because I wanted to be an architect. And they had an awfully good school of architecture, and it just became apparent very soon that the math was going to sink me. So I switched to commercial art, and that's what my degree is.
Well, I saw a reference to your first book, which amused me. Someone had compared you to Irma Bombeck.
Oh, yes, it might have been Irma Bombeck, you know. She did a review of my first book in the New York Times, which was a great thing, and she said, opened it by saying, some women go through life with toilet paper stuck on their heel. This woman goes through life with whatever, you know. But by that, you know, at that point, I would have been happy to be compared to Joseph Mengele. It didn't matter to me.
Well, we should say that your first book was a collection of,
yes, of essays.
Of homey
yes,
essays.
They covered a year in my life.
John Chancellor Makes Me Cry.
Because I literally couldn't think of any other thing to do a book about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought, perhaps it was really my editor's idea. I said, what should I do a book about? He said, why don't you just do a book about your life and use some of these essays that have been in Atlanta magazine and write others, and we'll make a book out of it.
So
that's how
after John Chancellor Makes Me Cry
came Heartbreak Hotel.
Yes, and what did you move directly from a volume of essays to a full-length novel, or did you mess with some stories in between?
Well, no, I've never done short stories. For some reason, it just doesn't. I don't think I'm capable of being that concise. It was a 2-book contract. I knew when I went to New York that we'd be talking about a contract, and it struck me all of a sudden that I would like to try to make sense of my college years, which had been a very strange and awfully unsatisfying time for me, and that there seemed to be so many questions raised that weren't answered. I couldn't see the sense of it. And I thought, I just wanted to write about it. And my editor, Larry, said, all right, you can throw in a book, but I don't think we can pay you anymore, which I said was fine, you know. Mm-hmm. So I did follow it with a novel, and I was amazed to see that fiction came rather easily to me. It was a revelation to me, although at first all the chapters were 1,000 words long, you know, because I was used to column length. But that worked, and I was no longer afraid of the form, so I just went on.
One of the remarks that you made last night was that possibly your first 4 or 5 books didn't make your publisher any money.
I don't think they did. I think they earned back their advance, but I don't think they lit up any balloons of joy. They grew slowly, and they'd gotten respectable by the time I did my 4th or 5th book. And then when Peachtree Road came along, that made the jump over to the New York Times list, which is, of course, puts you on another level. It means they're probably going to publish you. And they're probably going to give you a little bit more attention as far as promoting goes. But they had stuck with me because my editor loves to develop writers as writers. He's one of the last few left in New York who isn't about acquisitions, is about editing books.
A couple of your books have taken place in the late 50s and up into the 1960s, a very turbulent time. They're not though, directly about the civil rights movement.
No.
But you personally have always been very keenly interested in the civil rights movement.
I've been interested in the effect of it on people who weren't aware of its import before. The part of it that's always interested me is not the later part, the marches, because it was organized then, everybody knew what the movement was about. You had a position. But that very delicate stirring of awareness in souls in the South who might see there was a different way and should be a different way, and also saw that there would be a great price paid for the following of that way. Because that's how it came to me. And that it's a very personal point of view to want to show how it affected people. I don't think I'd be capable of doing a big book about the movement.
Well, it occurs to me that, I mean, I hope this doesn't seem like a provocative question, but last night you suggested, and I was in 100% agreement, that the side of the angels, the moral issue in the 60s, was absolutely clear. There was no doubt about which side was the side of the angels and which side was wrong. Now, though, we've gone through another 25 years, and it occurred, I wrote down while listening to you last evening, that whole business is nowhere near as clear now as it was 25 years ago.
And I don't think a scholar, a historian looking back, I think could have told us it wouldn't be. But we young ones caught up in it were absolutely sure that it was going to be at least the start of the great change. No, it isn't clear. I still think the moral imperative is. It still personally eludes me how anybody could believe any other way. But that's a very personal viewpoint. I can also see that people don't. And I'm not naive enough to think that legislation is going to make, well, we had to have it. And one thing that purity, that first thrust of the movement did was to get the legislation in place. Without it, we were nothing. The fact that it didn't change much is a heartbreaker. But I think we're right back where we were then and didn't know it. It's going to have to be one heart at a time, one mind at a time. And it's going to take a very long time.
Southerners go away, but they often come back.
Yeah.
And they come back to this mythical place called the home place.
The home place.
And for some reason, Southern fiction writers, you included, celebrate their return.
Yeah.
And it occurs to me that I don't think that's an entirely healthy thing to be,
Not necessarily healthy
brought
at all.
back and back and back.
At all. I don't know why we do, but we all do think it's such a wonderful thing, but we come home. I don't know why we think it's healthy. I mean, I know that we do come back. Because I think most of us who come to write about the South, or the ones that I know, have had roots here a long time. And it's whether we were in Michigan or the South, it's that great sense of context that pulls you back. As far as loving a region, I suspect I love New England more passionately than I ever will the South, but I understand the South. It's my place, it's my context. I can live my life in shorthand here. I don't have to learn everything. And that's a powerful draw.
Yes.
That comes out of the deepest part of it. The sense of home. It's such a basic thing, that just cry of home, I want to go home. I don't know why we have espoused it for our own, you know. I've heard plenty of writers from outside the South, get off the home place business, I don't want to go back to Yonkers. And I thought, well, how long were you in Yonkers? I mean, were you there long enough to put down roots? Was it your context?
How long is long enough?
Long enough, apparently for people who write about it, to get a sense that they belong on it. and I think maybe a generation or two at least. There'll be people writing about, and there should be, and I'm going to be interested in finding out who they are, who will write about the New South, the Sun Belt, for want of a better word, and they should, and it's not like the rural South, and our literature needs to change with it. It's such a new region that it doesn't, there's not even a literary metaphor for it yet, and that it'll almost be the language of a whole new region. I don't know any other part of the country that's changing that radically. Others seem to be settling into what they will be. But this one is reinventing itself, and it's cutting its roots right and left, and there'll have to be a new literature out of that. And I suspect it will be fair for it to be black as well as white, and to reflect, I think the home business may just go with my generation of writers who made that leap from rural to urban.
Do you suppose then, in the same way that we talk about literature now as being modern and postmodern, that we are now living in the post-New South?
Post-New South, sure. We were New Southing it 20 and 30 years ago, or we thought we were. But the South was changing then. It was no longer the agricultural South. Our older writers, in fact, some of our younger ones, always your obligatory coming of age always seems to come out of the old South to me. It feels as though it comes out of rural hookworm South. It may not be true, but my own first one had that feeling about it. But we're not like that now. If you're coming of age now, you come of age in Atlanta or Birmingham or Charlotte, and your world is certainly country, but it isn't agricultural country. It's strip malls, it's outlets, it's a whole other place. And whether or not you like it, I think you need to bear witness to what your times are. This can be the only reality that you have.
Yeah. Well, you've done both.
Yeah.
Over time. You've written novels which are very set in Atlanta. I mean, you are known as, at this point,
The Atlanta
yeah. novelist, and you have Peachtree Road and Downtown. But you've also chosen to take the Southern consciousness and move it to Maine, and move it to Italy, and move it to California, and told those stories, I guess you would say, through Southern eyes.
Southern eyes.
How does that, I mean, as a technique for a novelist, how does that work for you?
It works, I think it works well. It reflects my coming to those places. I came as a Southerner. I certainly couldn't write from any other point of view, and I couldn't be a New Englander or a California. But there's a lot to say about coming fresh to a region, because it has such an import on you the first time. It's almost a supranormal sense of the place. So that becomes part of the journey to me. To go into a new place long enough to live a month or two or a length of time in it, I think, is to find yourself changed by it. And I'm not sure you would do that if you weren't new to it. So I like that part of it.
But do you feel, I guess this is where the question is headed.
Okay.
When you bring that Southern consciousness to the hill country of Italy, or to Maine, or to California, do you feel that you are able to explain the place where you are, or are you continuing to explain the consciousness of the Southerner who is there?
Well, I think always I see the place through the eyes of the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
But I think any sensitive person coming the first time would see Italy. I mean, you might see it for the first time. It might be very new. You might not know a lot about it, but I think you would get a pretty clear look at it. I don't feel that, I feel like what I bring to those things is that basic sense that I've always had somehow, when I'm in a different place, and that being a little bit of an outsider. So that there's a transition over the course of the book, as there is with my getting to know a place from a real outsider, the one who walks alone, into the beginnings of being assimilated into it.
Yeah. Which is very different from that deeply,
Yes.
deeply knowledgeable and rooted
About the South.
voice that when you're writing about Atlanta itself.
I think it's a valid thing to do both. We do leave the South, a life's journey moves around.
Yeah.
I write a different book when I write about the South. I'll be writing, I guess, the next one, set in the low country of South Carolina, which is Pat's territory, or many other people. But I will write it from the point of view of someone going there and finding these wonderful things, or these not so wonderful things about it that change her. She brings to it something of the outside, but it also works its sea change on her. So it's a South, but it's not a South I know well.
So tell me, did you base the character of the drunken American artist on Pat Conroy?
Of a woman like Kat coming across a man that charismatic and powerful on Pat's group in Italy, because we really did go to a wedding there of our mutual friend, and Pat and Lenore were there, and we really did go on their honeymoon with them, but we had behaved a great deal better than those people did.
Oh, I hope so.
And Sam Forrest was Pat's a far nicer person than Sam Forrest, and if he thinks he's Sam Forrest, he needs to go back and see his analyst, because he's much
Oh, he
nicer
loves
than
it. He loves the idea of being that naughty.
Well, I suppose he can be that naughty if he wants to, but he can also be much nicer than Sam Forrest was ever. But I got the idea of that kind of larger-than-life person coming into an ordinary life and what it does to you, that kind of magic. Because to be around Pat is to be a changed person.
Well, how comfortable would you be if I wrote an essay called Anne Rivers Siddon's Feminist Novelist?
I'd be delighted.
You would?
I would.
What would you hope that I would say?
I would hope that you would say that you thought I really was a feminist writer. I think I am, but maybe not, maybe indirectly. But it's never a thing that really gets mentioned. I hear a lot about, well, you write women's books, don't you? And you know, saying, yeah. But
what's the difference then?
oh, I think the difference. I think when somebody says women's books, what they mean is romances or books that women will pick up. I think that's what they mean. Sometimes it is what they mean. Books about women are a vastly different matter, I think, than women's books. But it would please me a lot to be a feminist writer. If it would please me a lot to be able to make a difference in the lives of women who need to see that they can take charge, or see that they can. You know, it's ridiculous to be having this conversation because you'd think we were further along with it, but I don't sense that we are. When I go out on tours all over the country, I get much younger women than I coming, women in their 30s, early 30s, saying, I read so-and-so, and it really changed the way I thought about my marriage and what was available to me. And I thought, oh, why? Why now? Why don't you know that? Because I'm usually writing about older women who maybe legitimately didn't know that. But these are young women. I thought, what's going on here?
So in a sense, you see yourself in a group with perhaps Gail Godwin and
Maybe.
Lee Smith.
I think we talk about the same thing.
Ann Tyler?
I would hope so. I think we write about, we're concerned with the same kind of woman. I think same kind of journeys that to be made by women. I would hope I did that well, but the journey is everything for those writers, and it is for me too. The transition. I'm not interested in finished people in my life, and it certainly wouldn't make much of a book. But the journey from journey to selfhood is a very exciting thing.
The journey to selfhood for your female characters is often costly.
Yes.
You have a phrase that you use, which is something, you're going to think of it before I do, something like a price to be paid.
Yeah, I think I said last night that I write almost exclusively about people who pay prices, people who have paid for their lives or are in the process of doing it pretty dearly because they interest me. And I'm out of a generation and an area where a woman who aspired to something different, was different, dreamed a different dream, or either left the South or stayed and became what she felt was expected of her and paid a very high price. Either way, she paid a price. She lost her world or she lost herself. And that's beginning to change, of course, but it's still an interesting journey to me. I know any number of women, I get letters and I see them, who still seem to be listening to women who've been dead 100 years tell them how to live their lives. And sometimes I can hear my great-grandmother speaking through my grandmother, speaking through my mother, none of whom are alive now. Be nice now, be nice. You know, you sure you don't want to do that? Go on and get that teaching certificate. You know, why do you always have to make waves? And it's, those are loud whispers. They follow you a long way.
Well, could it be that problem of women hearing a voice, the voice of the dead, the voice of their grandmother, the voice of 100 years ago, isn't that directly related to the very kind of Southern continuity and roots that we also celebrate?
Well, we do celebrate it. I mean, there's an enormous duality there. I mean, there's no sense trying to pretend the whole package is wonderful. We can celebrate the richness and that sensual darkness, but my dad used to say that you can bet there's root rot down there. And there is. It's also just the very stuff of the world's literature, that dichotomy, that duality. So I don't regret it, but I do think that it's up to women to find their way out of that swamp. And maybe there's enough light and air in it now so that it doesn't happen anymore. I was at a debutante thing a couple of years ago at a club in Atlanta, and there they all were with their white buttons. And I thought, it's just not going to change. But the table I was sitting at, one of the young women was going to Outward Bound when her season was over, and one was at Johns Hopkins, and another was studying particle physics. So somehow you can have the gloves and the crinolines and kick the swamp too. At least they had managed to do it.
Well, neither Scarlett O'Hara nor Zelda Fitzgerald were studying particle physics
You're
or
right.
going to Outward Bound.
But you know, they might have.
Now,
Given another time, they
Yeah.
might have. So,
well, the heroine of your most recent novel, set in California, partly in the Hollywood scene and partly up north, goes through cataclysm. Marital cataclysm, and quite literally an earthquake.
Quite literally an earthquake, yeah.
She's an interesting creature.
I think she is too.
What is the problem? How has she gotten, she's done all the right things,
Yeah.
she's been a good person, cared for her sister, married a physician. Why isn't she happy?
Well, it's maybe not the route to being happy. It happens to so many women in the middle of their lives. You've spent so much of your time, and there are women who are born nurturers. I am one, or a created nurturer. A lot of Southern women are. It pleases me to do it. I've always thought that I was supposed to do that. But there comes a time when there's literally an ache in the middle that says there's a hole in the middle. You need to set off on some kind of journey to find out what lives in that hole. I mean, I know I'm not all nurturer. No woman is. I know I'm not all wife, I know I'm not all mother, but there's got to be something in there for me. And that's where she found herself when she went to get her daughter out of a situation in California and decided to stay and take a trip. I use the earthquake thing because I've always been interested in the idea that calamity or catastrophe, either internal or external, will really draw out what's in you, whatever, that you might never come to this alone. I have friends who lived through the Loma Prieta earthquake in California, the one modeled on the one I was writing about, and they are different people, vastly different women now. And I think that one of them, who was the press secretary to a governor, very competent, very put together woman, managed to lead a whole group of people with her little flashlight down 30 steps of a building that was whipping back and forth, and her husband, who was with her, was so terrified that somebody had to carry him down. Maybe 3 weeks later, she just totally collapsed and he was fine. And she said she realized that if you couldn't trust the very earth that you stood on, what else that you had always put your faith in all your life could you trust? And she said it was a process for her of literally tearing herself apart and putting herself together block by block to see what was in there. Very painful thing. She said, I'm not sorry I went through it. And the marriage did manage. I was furious with him, she said, for being able to be afraid when I wasn't. I was furious with him for being okay after it, and I wasn't. But you see, he was able to be afraid. Often a man is free to be afraid, and a woman doesn't feel she is.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a reversal of traditional
It may
machismo
be.
notions, isn't
I know it is. I just don't think of, I think many men are secure enough in themselves so that they don't have to pose. He was scared. He let somebody help him down, but she is the one who had overcome this stereotype of the clinging, to build herself into Superwoman. And she couldn't let herself be afraid. He was strong enough so that he could be afraid.
Well, there is an essay. I read an essay about your first 3 books. It's called From Hebe to Hippolyta.
I read it too.
And it's a study of
It is.
classical heroines
So-
as they might be reflected in some of
It
your
is.
early
I was
heroines.
amazed.
I was amazed
I
too.
was amazed.
But if you were to look at or if you were to speak to, say, a room full of academic critics, not book reviewers,
Yeah,
but academic critics. Let's pretend you're going to do that right now.
Oh, God.
Suppose you were looking out over the lectern and you were going to say, you should take my novels seriously and you should write articles about them because they are about serious business.
They are about what in the earth and life is more serious than making yourself whole, finding a road to personhood. What journey could compare with it, ever, anywhere? Isn't that what literature is?
Next week on Bookmark, we'll talk to 2 North Carolina writers, one very established, the other with a new first novel. I'll see you then.